This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode, where my guest is Pete Russell, founder of Ooooby, an online platform which matches customers with small-scale local growers. Shopping for food in this way promotes homegrown produce, farm-to-consumer sales, supports independent growers, helps people to buy local, and protects our farming heritage. And it helps us to move away from the chronically broken food system we currently live under. Listen in as Pete tells us how Ooooby works and how you can get involved if you're interested.
My background is that originally I grew up in sort of a semi-rural area. We always had some land, and my mum was very much into permaculture and things like that. But then as I sort of entered my adult life, I was very much involved, I was very businessy oriented, very entrepreneurial. And so I got involved in a lot of different businesses, but the one that I was in just before Ooooby was a food importing business. And we were importing frozen pastries from Europe and selling them through all the supermarkets around Australia. And it was a great business in the sense that it made good money. But we were really just completely decimating local businesses that were producing the same product. And I was starting to really sort of feel like, wow, I'm just sort of the teeth of the beast here in terms of, large centralized food just dominating the market in Australia for sort of pastries, croissants and Danish and the like. And then we had the GFC in 2008, and that made me see how fragile and precarious large-scale centralized food systems are, because our business pretty much capsized with the difference in exchange rates and things like that. And so that was the catalyst. That's what really woke me up to say, hang on a minute, large-scale centralized food is causing way more damage than it's worth. We need a way for small-scale farms and food producers to be able to reclaim market share and to be able to make just a much more resilient food system.
Yes, apart from the fact that it does trample on smaller businesses and it kind of knocks that diversity out of the market, it's also, as you say, really precarious. And if you've got it all tied up with one or two suppliers, then that makes the whole food chain really rocky in the event of something that comes along and disrupts the market.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that was 2008. I mean, then, at that point, I was thinking, well, I bet this isn't the first global shock to hit the supply chains. And, it did take a while before the next big shock came, which was obviously, 2020. But yeah, it's proving true. Like, large centralized supply chains are not resilient to shocks, whether it's, pandemics or economic shocks or wars and things like that. And we're seeing now the sort of the compounding inflationary effects on our food because of the very volatile situation that we're in.
So before we go any further, I just wanted to ask you, why is it called Ooooby?
Okay, so there's 4 O's, OOOBY. That stands for out of our own backyards. So the idea is that we can look after ourselves out of our own backyards. We don't need to be sort of suckling on the corporate teat, so to speak. And it's more than just growing food in literally your own backyard. It's also about sort of local regional food and supporting and participating in that sort of local regional food economy.
So how does it actually work at a practical level?
At a practical level, what Ooooby provides is an online platform for small farms and small-scale food producers to be able to sell direct to local households. What it does is that it facilitates all the sales, it simplifies all the packing, it optimizes all the deliveries, it sort of handles all the logistics and the transactions involved in selling direct to local, to your local community.
As you were talking then, I thought, okay, so it goes to just my local area, I presume.
Pretty much. I mean, to give you an example, at the moment there are well, there's close to 100 farms that are using Ooooby or are signed on to Ooooby to be able to sell to their local communities. The function of those, the function that the Ooooby facilitates for these farms is what we call a sort of a hub model, and that is where they have a barn on the farm or some building on the farm where they are receiving the food from their own fields or buying in from other local farms, other complementary products like, or things like eggs and bread and milk and things like that, where they sort of bundle together a range, a sort of a farm shop range, and then pack those boxes in that shed or in that barn, and then deliver them to their local area. So the software gives them the kind of the ability for them to load up their own truck or their own van or something like that, and get in and actually follow the route optimization to do the deliveries themselves. So some hubs will, or farm hubs will, use couriers to be able to sort of send the boxes, send the food further afield, but mostly it is about drawing a circle on a map and saying, right, we're going to serve households within this locale.
So I suppose if you live somewhere and there's a regional specialty food, although in some ways that's not good because it doesn't go further afield, but in some ways it's really nice to keep it local like that.
Well, it also makes it a more cost-effective model. Like when you're selling your food, if you're growing some heirloom products and some quite nice and premium type products, if you want to sell them further afield, you need to put the price up because there's more hands involved in getting it to market. There's more distance involved. There's more storage usually involved. There's more packaging often involved. And so, but you as a producer isn't making more money. The customer's paying more money, but you're not making any more money. Whereas when you sell it locally and you're doing the packing and the delivering yourself, you're making the full retail value, and the customer's able to pay a price that's actually quite reasonable. And so you're able to reach more customers because you're able to price it in a way that's more relevant to more people. And so you're not missing out on business, really. You're just capturing business that you otherwise wouldn't have got, sort of closer to home.
Yeah, and you spoke about packaging there. I mean, when people sign up, do they sign up to say that they will package things sustainably, or do you have any input on that?
We don't have policies, so to speak, around what packaging materials they can use, but what we do have is an agreement, what we call a hub agreement, which does state that the producers follow ecologically sound production principles, right? So we don't stipulate that the food has to be organic, for example, but about 90% of the food that is traded on Ooooby is actually certified organic. And the ones that aren't certified organic, they are usually smaller scale producers that can't justify jumping through all the hoops for organic, but they practice organic production principles. And then following on from that, they typically don't want to then go and create a whole lot of ridiculous packaging because that's just not in line with their ethos. So most of the time you'll have the food is delivered in reused boxes or reusable packaging, or packaging that's easily compostable. And yeah, so there's very little packaging that goes on typically, and the packaging that does get used is usually reusable.
So as a customer, if I signed up and I wanted to specify that I just wanted organic veg, for example, could I do that?
Yeah, you could, absolutely. It would depend on the farm that you're signing up to. So remember, I guess a key point to understand here is that you wouldn't be a customer of Ooooby. You would be a customer of your local farm hub, right? And that they are an independent local business that is operating on the Ooooby platform in order to be able to provide that service to their local community. But they are an autonomous organization themselves. They're using Ooooby as a platform, kind of like, Etsy. When you're buying something on Etsy, you're not buying from Etsy, you're buying from a craftsperson. So it's similar to that with Ooooby, is you're on Ooooby, but you're not buying from Ooooby. You're buying from your local producer, and they run their business based on their principles and their ethos.
So if you were a local hub, does Ooooby do anything to kind of match people up with their local hubs?
Yeah, we do. I mean, implicitly we do. If you set up a hub on Ooooby from your farm, and then you populate your instance or your site on Ooooby with, your products and your story and who you are and so forth, just by doing it on the Ooooby platform, you're instantly search optimized, right? Because Ooooby's got a lot of Google juice, so to speak, right? So you'll instantly be going, very much, you're definitely on the first page for search. If most of the times you're at the very top when someone's searching for, say, local organic veg or local organic food, you'll be there and you'll show up straight away. Plus, we also help with advice and so forth to help to maximize exposure and ideas around promotions and things like that. And then Ooooby itself, like here we are having a chat on a podcast, like we're talking about the platform itself out there among the general populace. So people who are looking for hubs, looking for food in their local area can find it.
And does it depend on your local hub as to the range of products that are available, or have you said, let's keep it to fruit and veg, for example?
No, it completely depends. So there are some local hubs that are just the fresh veg from their fields, and it's limited to what's in season that week, or that period, and that's all you can get from them. And sometimes those hubs will only be serving food, 9 months of the year. But that's the exception to the rule. That's a few of the hubs that are like that. Most of the hubs, they set their own range, but they do provide enough variety to be able to supply year round. And they typically have all the real staples, like, your veg, and then your eggs, your bread. If they're going to do chilled, they'll include milk and butter and, the dairy ranges and things like that. So, the optimal hubs are usually the ones that sort of represent like a farm shop online, where you can do the sort of shopping you would do at a farm shop, but have it delivered to your door.
I'm just thinking as well, if the utopia of small scale farming came off and then everybody said, okay, right, well, we're going to shop through a platform like Ooooby and we're going to shop local through our local hub. And then all of a sudden your local farm got flooded and couldn't offer anything that week, that month. Do you then kind of default to your next local hub, or are you just stuffed at that point?
That's a really good question. Yes. So that's one of the things that's starting to emerge now that there is, coming up to 100 of these hubs around the country, and we're adding about one a week at the moment. So it's growing quite rapidly. There's a redundancy that's becoming apparent, right? Like, for example, there's a hub in Wales who they've got another hub not far from them who want to go on holidays, right? But they don't want their customers to stop buying. And so they've spoken to a neighboring hub saying, hey, would you mind packing and delivering our boxes for us while we're on holidays? And so the neighboring hub's like, yeah, sure, that's great. This gives us more to do. We get a cut of those sales while you're away, and we keep those customers happy. And so they're still using the food that they would be, supplying to the customers, but it's being packed in a neighboring region. It's being put in a van, and the delivery run is still being done. But yeah, they're leaning on a neighboring or, a near enough by hub to keep the continuity going.
That's really good. It's a nice sort of cooperative attitude. And that made me think as well about pricing. So I don't know if, for example, you were a producer and your stuff was quite labour intensive to produce, is there a dialogue between the hubs and the producers? Because, for example, you could have a local hub that has one or two producers that have quite high prices, and then their other maybe local hub actually manages to get a better deal from the producers. Is there the kind of worry that in the end the local hubs take over the role of the big bad supermarkets in terms of saying, right, producers, I need you to be a better kind of producer and a lower cost producer so that we can get the business?
Yeah, very good insight there. Well, interestingly, most of the hubs are producers themselves, right? So yes, I guess there's the chance that you'll have a farmer who is running a hub from their farm, who is then going to sort of, collude with other hubs in the different areas to then push the prices down for the farms that are supplying to them. But I think that culturally, a farmer who knows what it's like to be a farmer who has their prices pushed down is less likely to play that kind of game. The other thing to take into account is that these local food hubs, or this model cuts an enormous amount of cost out of the supply chain. And so they can be price competitive without having to pay less to the producer. So if you compare, and say, for one of an easy analogy, an apple, right? Or a broccoli, we'll call it a broccoli. So a broccoli that you buy through the supermarket, you're paying up to like 80% of the price of that broccoli is supply chain cost, and 20%, or so if it's a 1 pound broccoli for ease of calculation, 20p is going to the farmer, and 80p is going to all the people between the gate and your plate. And the reason there's 80p going there is because it's expensive. They've got to take it to a big DC. The big DC's got big overhead costs. There's handling. It's getting recollated into different places. There's storage. Often there'll be packaging. Sometimes they'll have to wrap it in plastic to keep it fresh until it gets to the end of the supply chain. All these things. And then because of that, they've had to pay the farmer a very, very low price in order to get to market at a reasonable price. With a small-scale local supply chain, you've got way less supply chain overhead cost. You've got shorter distance. You've got fewer handling. It's much faster. And so you can compete on price without having to push the actual price you pay for the product down. And that's a huge part of why this model is successful, is it is actually very price competitive whilst keeping the price you actually pay for the food decent.
I don't want to compare you in any way to kind of other veg box providers, and I'm not doing that at all because I know that you're very different. But I did have quite a scandalous experience, which I'm going to put to you because it could potentially happen. So a while back, somebody very kindly gave me a discount code for a veg box scheme, which I then ordered. And a lot of the veg came and it just was already off when it arrived. And the worst part was that I'd actually got some carrots, and it was all supposed to be in sustainable packaging and everything, and there was a remnant of a plastic net bag that the carrots had obviously been in and then been decanted into this lovely cardboard recyclable box. And so I spoke to the company and they seemed actually quite scandalised by it too, because it meant, I guess, that someone was buying carrots in plastic bags and then sticking them in boxes and pretending that they were all like sustainably, organically produced and all the rest of it. But I just wondered, as the platform provider, is there any quality control in place from your end, or does there need to be even?
Well, right now, we don't have like a monitoring system for that type of thing. What we do have is when a farm is joining onto the Ooooby platform, they do have to comply with the standards that we have in the hub agreement around ecologically sound production. And they are typically farmers that are producing the food themselves. Yes, they will be buying in from different places, but they're usually quite small scale. And so the incentives for them to do things like, buy in conventionally cheap product that's been imported in order to fill their boxes up with less, value product and so on, is not the same as a company that's trying to serve, 10,000 customers, and they can see, well, if we can shave off this much cost, then we can make this much extra money this month. We're working at a completely different scale. Like the average hub on Ooooby has about 100 customers, right? Which is actually quite a small business. And they aren't going to gain very much by trying to rip their customers off or by trying to play these sorts of games. The incentive for them is to provide a good quality product that is their product that they've mostly grown, and they're dealing with their local suppliers around their local region. So I think there's less incentives for them to play those games. They've got a reputation that is actually local. It's not like, oh, there's someone somewhere out of town. They're part of the local community. They're representing themselves. They're representing their own brand as farmers themselves or food producers themselves. So it's kind of, I don't know, I think it comes down to the bigger the business, the more levels of abstraction there are between the business and the customer. The more ways you can sort of play, you can game play things without sort of feeling like it's that much of a problem. But when you're small and intimate, it's just harder to play those games, and it's easier to be found out, I think. So we don't have monitoring in place. We do have agreements. If we were to come across something scandalous was going on the platform, we do have the ability to say, I'm sorry, but that's not how we like to play on this platform, or that's not really how we like people to use the platform, and we can always deplatform them. But we've never had to do that. We've never had to do that because I think we tend to attract, like birds of a feather flock together. We tend to attract good quality farms that are really representing the right principles that we, that we stand by. And that forms a culture. There's a culture of farms and food hubs on Ooooby that is the antithesis to that kind of behaviour.
Yeah, I think you've made some really good points there, and I totally agree that I'm sure that the kind of people who are interested in this sort of thing are not looking to rip people off necessarily. So how does it work in terms of pricing? If I wanted to set up a local hub, do I pay you for the amount of produce that I sell, or is it kind of a set fee?
It's a percentage of your total sales. So we just charge 2.5% of whatever you sell on the platform.
So at the moment, it covers the UK in its entirety, does it?
Well, yeah. I mean, there are hubs, the depth and breadth of the UK, all the way up to the Highlands and, all the way to the end of Cornwall and East Kent and through the Midlands. It doesn't mean that wherever you are in the UK, you can get a delivery, because it all depends on how far each of these hubs are willing to drive. But yes, as more and more are being added, are joining the platform and seeing this as a viable way for them to be able to make a decent living by being a food producer, then more and more of the country is being covered.
I mean, it sounds brilliant. So if people are interested in becoming a customer or actually investigating the possibility of becoming a local hub themselves, where could they go to find out more?
They go to ooooby.com. So that's OOOBY.com. And they'll find their way from there.
Thank you very much to Pete for talking about Ooooby, and to you too for listening. Here's Dr. Ian Bedford now, talking about a bug that is seriously unappealing. Onions. Appealing? Never mind.
The alliums, which includes onions, shallots, leeks and garlic, are not only important as commercially cultivated crops, but are an important homegrown group of vegetables too. However, over the past 2 decades, alliums throughout many parts of Britain have been under attack from an invasive plant pest, a small 3mm long dipteran called the Allium leafminer fly. This fly had first been reported as a crop pest in Poland during the 1950s, before spreading throughout the rest of Europe, and it eventually appeared in Britain during 2003, where it was first found in an East Midlands garden. Since then, the Allium leafminer fly has become widespread across most of England and Wales. For allium growers, the problem starts each spring, when the flies hatch from their underground pupae to mate. Guided onto alliums by their unique aroma, the females then begin puncturing the leaves with the rear of their abdomen, before feeding on sap within some of the wounds and laying eggs into others. After a few days, the eggs hatch into tiny white maggots that then surreptitiously tunnel their way downwards inside the plant, feeding on the leaf cells as they go. But by the time they're fully grown, the damage they'll have caused inside the allium will often have enabled fungal rots to establish that can then result in wilting and death. The mature maggots, though, will either pupate within that decaying allium or in the surrounding soil, from which the second generation of leaf-mining flies will hatch during mid to late autumn. And it's their offspring that will then pupate and overwinter again. Controlling an outbreak of Allium leaf miner flies is tricky though, since even if you knew they were there, there's nothing that can be done to stop the maggots tunnelling inside other than destroying the affected plants. So it has to be done by preventing the adult flies from laying their eggs in the first place. Alliums therefore need to be planted or sown in a location where leaf mining flies have not previously occurred, and should then be grown if possible under a barrier of fine mesh netting or horticultural fleece. It's also essential to make sure any potentially infested plants are removed and destroyed during the winter months, and that the surrounding soil is regularly dug to expose the overwintering pupae to frosts and to insectivorous birds.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.